The train whistle pierced the Montana winter like a knife through silk. Catherine Morrison pressed her gloved hand against the frosted window, watching the endless white landscape roll past. Her reflection stared back, pale skin, dark circles under green eyes, and lips pressed into a thin line of determination mixed with dread. She was 23 years old, traveling alone to marry a man she had never met. The letter had arrived 6 months ago at the Boston boarding house where she worked scrubbing floors. Seeking respectable wife. Own ranch. Comfortable living. The words had seemed like salvation then, an escape from the groping hands of the landlord and the constant gnawing of hunger in her belly. She had responded with a carefully penned letter, lying about her skills in cooking and sewing, promising to be obedient and hardworking. Thomas Whitmore had sent money for passage and a tintype photograph. In it, he stood rigid and unsmiling, a tall man with a thick beard and cold eyes. Now, as the train slowed into Redemption Creek, Catherine clutched her carpet bag tighter. Everything she owned fit inside it. The platform was nearly empty when she stepped down, her worn boots crunching on snow-dusted wood. A blast of wind cut through her thin coat, and she shivered violently. Catherine Morrison. The voice was harsh, impatient. She turned to see Thomas Whitmore, somehow larger and more menacing than his photograph suggested. His face was weathered and hard, his mouth a cruel slash beneath his mustache. He looked her up and down like a farmer inspecting livestock at market. "You're skinnier than I expected," he said flatly. "Come on. We have a 2-hour ride." No greeting. No welcome. Catherine followed him to a wagon, her heart sinking with each step. He didn't help her up. She climbed aboard herself, settling onto the rough wooden seat as he snapped the reins. They rode in silence through the dying afternoon light, past rolling hills dotted with skeletal trees. The ranch house appeared as darkness fell, a squat structure hunched against the wind. Inside, it was barely warmer than outside. The main room held a table, 2 chairs, and a cold stove. Thomas gestured to a narrow doorway. "That's the bedroom. You'll cook breakfast before dawn. Lunch at noon. Supper at 6. I don't tolerate laziness or waste." Catherine nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "We'll marry tomorrow at the church. The Reverend's expecting us at 10. He turned away, then paused. "One more thing. I don't believe in spoiling women. You'll eat what I decide you can eat. You'll work for your keep like everyone else." That night, Catherine lay in the darkness listening to Thomas snore in the chair by the stove. She hadn't been offered food since arriving, though her stomach cramped with hunger. Tomorrow she would become his wife, bound to him by law and God. The reality of her mistake crashed over her like a frozen wave. She had traded one prison for another, perhaps worse. The wedding was a bleak affair. The Reverend spoke quickly, his breath fogging in the unheated church. Catherine wore the same dress she had traveled in. There were no flowers, no witnesses except the Reverend's wife who glanced at Catherine with what might have been pity. When Thomas kissed her, his lips were cold and hard against hers, more punishment than affection. Back at the ranch, he put her to work immediately. Chop wood. Haul water. Scrub floors. Mend fences. The tasks were endless and brutal. For supper, he gave her a small bowl of watery broth and a piece of hard bread while he ate steak and potatoes. When she finished, still hungry, he collected her bowl. "That's your portion," he said. "A woman your size doesn't need more." The pattern was set. Each day, Catherine worked until her hands bled and her back screamed. Each day, Thomas measured out her food with cruel precision. Always just enough to keep her upright, never enough to satisfy. Within weeks, her dresses hung loose. Within months, her hip bones jutted sharp beneath her skin. She was starving slowly, deliberately, and there was no one to help her. 6 months into her marriage, Catherine no longer recognized herself. The mirror, a cracked piece of glass hung above the wash basin, showed a stranger. Her cheekbones cast shadows across her face. Her collarbone protruded like the edge of a blade. Her wedding ring spun loose on her finger. Thomas noticed these changes with satisfaction, as if her diminishment somehow increased his power. Winter deepened its grip on Montana. Snow piled against the house in towering drifts. The wind howled through cracks in the walls like tortured spirits. Catherine's daily ration had been reduced further. Thomas claimed the harsh weather meant supplies were scarce, but she saw the full pantry, the smoked meats hanging in the cellar, the sacks of flour and sugar he kept locked away. "Please," she whispered one morning, her voice barely audible. "I'm so hungry." Thomas looked up from his full plate, eggs and bacon and fresh biscuits dripping with butter. "Hunger builds character. My mother always said idle women grow fat and useless. I'm keeping you sharp." She wanted to scream that she wasn't idle, that she worked harder than any hired hand, that her hands were raw from scrubbing and her shoulders ached from hauling wood. But she had learned silence. Speaking only brought worse punishments, locked outside in the cold, denied even her meager portions, forced to sleep in the barn. One afternoon in late February, Catherine was struggling to carry water from the well when her vision blurred. The world tilted sideways. She felt herself falling, the bucket slipping from her nerveless fingers. The snow was surprisingly soft when she hit it, almost welcoming. She lay there, unable to rise, watching her breath make small clouds in the frozen air. She might have died there if not for the sound of hoofbeats. Through her dimming vision, she saw a rider approaching, a man on a painted horse, moving with fluid grace through the snow. He dismounted swiftly and knelt beside her. His face filled her vision, strong features, dark eyes full of concern, long black hair framing his face. "Easy," he said, his voice gentle. "Don't try to move." He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, carrying her toward the house. Thomas emerged onto the porch, his face darkening with anger. "Put her down, Mankato. This is my property. She's my wife." The man, Mankato, looked at Thomas with an expression of barely controlled fury. "Your wife is dying. When did she last eat? That's none of your concern. We had an agreement. You stay on your land, I stay on mine. Our agreement doesn't include watching a woman starve." Mankato's grip tightened protectively around Catherine. "I'm taking her. I'll bring her back when she's strong enough to stand." Thomas reached for the rifle by the door, but Mankato was faster. In one smooth motion, he had Catherine on his horse and was mounted behind her. "Touch that gun and our peace ends today. Choose carefully, Whitmore." Catherine felt the horse surge forward, carrying her away from the ranch. She should have protested, should have feared this stranger, but she felt nothing except overwhelming relief. The rhythmic movement of the horse, the warmth of Mankato's chest against her back, the steady beat of his heart, these sensations filled her fading consciousness. They rode for what seemed like hours, though it might have been minutes. When they stopped, strong arms lifted her again. She opened her eyes to see a dwelling unlike any she had known, a house built of logs and earth, warm firelight spilling from the windows. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and something cooking, something that made her stomach clench with desperate need. A woman's face appeared above her, weathered and kind. She spoke in a language Catherine didn't understand, but her tone was soothing. Mankato responded, then turned to Catherine. "This is my mother, White Bird Woman. She'll care for you. You're safe here." "My husband," Catherine whispered. "He'll come. Let him try." Mankato's jaw set in a hard line. "I am Mankato, chief of the Lakota in this territory. I've watched your husband's cruelty for months, waiting for a reason to intervene. You've given me that reason. Rest now. When you wake, you'll eat." Catherine wanted to thank him, to ask 1,000 questions, but darkness was pulling her under. For the first time in months, she surrendered to it without fear. Whatever came next, at least she would face it with a full stomach. Catherine woke to firelight dancing on unfamiliar walls. For a moment, panic gripped her. Where was she? Then memory returned in fragments. The snow, the collapse, strong arms carrying her away. She turned her head carefully, her body aching in new ways, and found herself lying on a bed of furs softer than anything she had ever touched. The dwelling was a single large room, ingeniously constructed. Hides and blankets created private spaces along the walls. The fire burned in a central pit, its smoke rising through an opening in the ceiling. Herbs hung from the rafters, filling the air with unfamiliar but pleasant scents. It was warm, genuinely warm, for the first time since she had arrived in Montana. "You're awake." White Bird Woman appeared beside her, carrying a wooden bowl. Steam rose from it, and the smell made Catherine's mouth flood with saliva. The older woman helped her sit up, propping her against rolled furs, then held the bowl to her lips. The broth was rich and savory, with bits of meat and vegetables floating in it. Catherine wanted to gulp it down, but White Bird Woman pulled it back after each small sip. "Slowly," she said in heavily accented English. "Your stomach has forgotten food. We teach it again." Over the next hour, Catherine consumed the entire bowl in careful increments. It was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. When she finished, tears rolled down her hollowed cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. White Bird Woman patted her hand. "Sleep more. Tomorrow, more food." Catherine did sleep, deeply and dreamlessly. When she woke again, it was to the sound of voices speaking in Lakota. Through half-closed eyes, she saw Mankato sitting by the fire with an older man, both of them working on what looked like arrows. The rhythm of their conversation was musical, rising and falling like water over stones. Mankato glanced over and caught her watching. He rose and came to her bedside, moving with that same fluid grace she remembered from the snow. "How do you feel?" "Better." Her voice was stronger now. "I don't understand. Why are you helping me?" He settled onto a stool beside her, his dark eyes studying her face. "Why wouldn't I? You needed help. But I'm a stranger. And my husband. Your husband is a cruel man who was slowly killing you. I've seen this before. White men who take mail-order brides, treating them like property instead of people." His expression hardened. 3 years ago, another woman came to his ranch. I saw her in town once, bruises on her arms, fear in her eyes. She disappeared one winter night. Whitmore said she ran away. I've never believed him. Catherine felt ice in her veins. "You think he killed her?" "I have no proof. But I swore then that if another woman came to his ranch, I would watch. I would intervene if needed." He leaned forward. "Tell me, Catherine Morrison, what was your life before this? What brought you to answer a mail-order bride advertisement?" Something in his tone, in the genuine interest in his eyes, loosened her tongue. She told him everything, the boarding house, the hunger, the desperation. She told him about the lies she had written in her letter, the hope she had felt seeing that train ticket, the moment she first saw Thomas and knew she had made a terrible mistake. Mankato listened without interruption, his face grave. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You survived," he finally said. "That takes strength most people never need to find. You're stronger than you know." "I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm dying." "You were dying. Now you're healing. There's a difference." He stood. "Rest more. In a few days, when you're stronger, we'll talk about what comes next." The days blurred together in a haze of eating, sleeping, and slowly regaining strength. White-Bird Woman was endlessly patient, gradually increasing Catherine's portions, adding new foods as her stomach adjusted. She made poultices for Catherine's chapped hands and cracked feet. She sang songs in Lakota that sounded like prayers. Mankato visited each day, sometimes bringing fresh meat from hunting, sometimes just sitting by the fire and talking. He told her about the Lakota people, their traditions, their struggles with the encroaching white settlers. He spoke of the land with reverence, describing the mountains and rivers as if they were relatives. Catherine found herself looking forward to these conversations. For the first time in her life, a man spoke to her as an equal, asking her opinions, listening to her thoughts. He taught her words in Lakota, Wakantanka for the Great Spirit, Unsai for grandmother, Mitakuyo Yasin for all my relations. Each word felt like a small gift. 2 weeks after her rescue, Catherine could stand without dizziness and walk around the dwelling. She looked at her reflection in a polished piece of metal and saw color returning to her cheeks, clarity to her eyes. She was still painfully thin, but she was alive. She was healing. That evening, Mankato found her sitting by the fire, watching the flames. "You're thinking about going back?" It wasn't a question. Catherine nodded slowly. "I'm his wife. The law. The law is white man's law. It has no power here." Mankato sat beside her. "But I won't keep you prisoner. That would make me no better than Whitmore. The choice must be yours." Catherine stared into the fire, watching sparks spiral upward like tiny stars seeking the sky. The question Mankato had left unspoken hung between them. What would she choose? 3 weeks in this warm dwelling had transformed her, not just physically but in ways she was only beginning to understand. The constant gnawing terror that had defined her months with Thomas had eased, replaced by something strange and unfamiliar, peace. But peace came with complications. Thomas was her legal husband. In the eyes of God and the government, she belonged to him. The word belonged made her stomach turn. She had spent her whole life belonging to someone, to the orphanage, to the boarding house landlord, to Thomas. The idea of choosing her own path seemed impossible, like teaching herself to fly. "Tell me about your first wife." The words left her mouth before she could stop them. She knew Mankato had been married. White-Bird Woman had mentioned a daughter who lived in another camp. Mankato's expression shifted, becoming distant. "Wichapi. Morning Star. She died bringing our daughter into this world 8 winters ago." His voice held old grief, worn smooth by time. "She was strong, fierce, full of laughter. She chose me, not the other way around. Among our people, women have always had the power to choose their husbands, to divorce them if they wish. A man who mistreats his wife finds himself without one, and without honor. That sounds like a dream, Catherine whispered. It's simply how things should be. Balance. Respect. He turned to face her fully. You asked why I helped you. Part of it was duty. As chief, I'm responsible for keeping peace, preventing unnecessary death. But there's more. I saw you struggling with that water bucket, your arms shaking, your body failing. In that moment, I saw Wichapi. Not because you look like her, but because I saw the same stubborn determination to survive. And I couldn't watch you die. Catherine's throat tightened. What happens if I stay here? Thomas will come. He already has. 3 times in the past week. I've turned him away each time. Mankato's jaw set. He knows he can't take you by force, not without starting a war he can't win. But he's furious. He sees you as his property, his possessions stolen by savages. Those are his words, not mine. He'll use the law. He'll bring the marshal. Perhaps. The marshal is a fair man, but he follows white law. That law says you're Whitmore's wife. Mankato leaned forward. But there are other laws, older laws. This land where you're sitting? It's treaty land. The government recognizes my authority here. If you choose to stay, if you formally ask for sanctuary, I can grant it. Whitmore would need the army to take you, and he's not important enough for that. Catherine's mind reeled. You would risk conflict with the government for me? A woman you barely know. I would risk it for what's right. And I'm beginning to know you, Catherine Morrison. You're not who you pretend to be. His eyes held hers. You present yourself as weak, helpless, but you survived 6 months of deliberate starvation. You worked until your hands bled. You didn't give up, didn't stop trying. That's not weakness. That's extraordinary strength. Something cracked open in Catherine's chest. No one had ever called her strong. No one had ever seen her as anything but a burden, a mouth to feed, a body to use. Mankato saw her differently, and that vision was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. If I stay, what would my life look like? You would be free to choose. Work if you wish, rest if you need. Learn our ways, or keep your own. White Bird Woman would welcome the company. And when you're truly healed, if you decide to leave, to go somewhere else entirely, I'll help you. I'll give you money, supplies, safe passage to wherever you want to go. Why? The word burst out. Why would you do all this? Mankato was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled between them. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and honest. Because the first time you smiled, 3 days ago, when White Bird Woman made you laugh with a story about her youth, I felt something I haven't felt since Wichapi died. Not pity. Not duty. Something warmer, something that scared me. I'm not asking for anything from you, Catherine. I'm only offering freedom. What you do with it is your choice alone. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs. She thought of Thomas's cold eyes, his measured cruelty, the slow death he had planned for her. She thought of the train ride west, of all her life's desperate choices made from fear and necessity. She thought of Mankato carrying her through the snow, of White Bird Woman's patient kindness, of warm fires and full bowls and the sound of laughter in a language she was learning word by word. I choose to stay, she said, and the words felt like the first true choice she had ever made. Mankato's face transformed, relief and joy breaking through his careful composure. Then you'll have sanctuary. Whatever comes, we face it together. That night, lying in her bed of furs, Catherine understood that she had crossed an invisible threshold. Tomorrow, Thomas would learn of her decision. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. But tonight, she was warm and fed and free. Tonight, she allowed herself to hope for something beyond mere survival. She allowed herself to imagine a future where she belonged to no one but herself, where strength was recognized, where choice was possible. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, the fire burned bright and steady. Spring came reluctantly to Montana, winter releasing its grip one frozen finger at a time. Catherine had been living among the Lakota for 3 months when Thomas Whitmore finally made his move. The marshal arrived on a gray morning, accompanied by 3 deputies and Thomas himself, all on horseback, all armed. Catherine was grinding corn with White Bird Woman when she heard the commotion. Her hands stilled, the stone mortar suddenly heavy in her grip. She had known this moment would come, had prepared for it in her mind countless times, but fear still flooded her veins. Mankato emerged from his dwelling, flanked by 24 Lakota warriors. The message was clear: violence would be met with overwhelming force. The marshal, a weathered man named Garrett with iron-gray hair, raised one hand in a gesture of peace. I'm here on official business, Chief Mankato. Thomas Whitmore has filed a complaint. He says you're holding his wife against her will. Catherine Morrison is here of her own choice. She claimed sanctuary, which is my right to grant under treaty law. Mankato's voice carried across the distance, calm but unyielding. Let me talk to her, the marshal said. Alone. If she confirms she's here willingly, I'll consider the matter settled. Catherine stepped forward before she could lose her courage. She had changed in 3 months, gained weight, grown stronger, let her hair grow longer beneath the beaded band white bird woman had made her. She wore a simple dress of deerskin, practical and warm, so different from the threadbare cotton she had arrived in. Thomas's face contorted with rage when he saw her. Catherine. Get over here right now. This foolishness ends today. The old fear tried to surface, that conditioned response to his anger. But Catherine looked at him and saw something new, a small, cruel man who had power only when others surrendered it to him. She turned to the marshal. Marshal Garrett, I'm here of my own free will. I left my husband because he was starving me to death. Chief Mankato saved my life. She's lying. Thomas spurred his horse forward. She's my legal wife. She has to come back. Thomas Whitmore, Catherine said, and her voice rang out clear and strong, I will never return to you. You can use every law, every marshal, every weapon you have, but I will not go back to dying slowly in your house. The marshal's eyes moved between them, assessing. Mrs. Whitmore, are you claiming abuse? I'm claiming attempted murder. Catherine pulled back her sleeve, showing arms that were still too thin, showing scars from frostbite and overwork. For 6 months, he gave me barely enough food to survive. He worked me until I collapsed. He wanted me weak, wanted me dependent, wanted me broken. The day Chief Mankato found me, I was unconscious in the snow, dying. She's hysterical. Ungrateful. I gave her a home. Thomas's face was purple with fury. You gave me a prison and called it marriage. Catherine's voice didn't waver. She felt Mankato's presence behind her, steady and strong, but she didn't need his support to stand. She was standing on her own. I choose to stay here. I claim sanctuary under treaty law. And if you force me to return, Marshal, you'll be delivering me to my death. Marshal Garrett was quiet for a long time, his weathered face thoughtful. Finally, he turned to Thomas. Whitmore, I've heard rumors about you. About your first mail-order bride who disappeared. I never had proof, never had reason to investigate. But I'm not stupid, and I'm not blind. This woman looks like she's been through hell. I'm not dragging her back to it. The law says she's my wife. The law also recognizes treaty land and sovereign rights. Chief Mankato has granted her sanctuary. Unless you want to file a federal complaint and wait months for a territorial judge, there's nothing more I can do. The marshal turned his horse. Let it go, Whitmore. Find another wife to torment. Thomas's hand moved toward his gun, but the Lakota warriors tensed, arrows suddenly knocked, and he froze. For a moment, violence hung in the air like a blade suspended by thread. Then the marshal grabbed Thomas's reins. Don't be a fool. You'll die, and you'll start a war. She's not worth it. Those words, she's not worth it, would have destroyed Catherine 3 months ago. Now they rolled off her like water off stone. Thomas wasn't saying she had no worth. He was admitting he had lost, that his power over her was broken, that he couldn't reach her anymore. They left, Thomas twisting in his saddle to glare back with pure hatred. Catherine watched until they disappeared beyond the ridge. Only then did she allow herself to shake, only then did her knees weaken. Mankato was there instantly, his hand on her elbow, steadying her. You were magnificent, he said softly. I was terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. He smiled. You faced down your demon, Catherine. Not everyone has that strength. White Bird Woman embraced her, murmuring words of pride in Lakota. The other women of the camp surrounded her, touching her shoulders, her hands, their faces reflecting respect and welcome. Catherine realized something profound. She had found a family, not through blood or law, but through choice and acceptance. That evening, as the sun set in streaks of gold and crimson, Catherine sat with Mankato overlooking the valley. 3 months ago, she had been a dying woman with no hope. Now she was alive, truly alive, for the first time in her life. What happens now? She asked. Now you live. Mankato's dark eyes held warmth. You learn, you grow, you become whoever you want to be. The past is behind you. The future is yours to write. Catherine thought about futures, about choices, about the strange journey that had brought her from a Boston boarding house to this Montana hillside. She thought about mail-order bride advertisements and desperate gambles, about the thin line between tragedy and salvation. She thought about Mankato's steady presence, about how he had fed not just her body but her soul, giving her the nourishment she truly needed, respect, kindness, freedom. I want to learn everything, she said. Your language, your ways. I want to belong here, truly belong. You already do. Mankato's hand found hers, warm and strong. You belong to yourself first, which is how it should be. Everything else follows from there. As darkness fell and stars emerged like diamonds scattered across velvet, Catherine Morrison, who had been starving, who had been dying, who had been nothing, felt something bloom in her chest. Not just hope. Something fiercer, brighter, more enduring. She felt joy. She felt power. She felt, at last, free. The wind carried the scent of sage and wood smoke. Somewhere in the camp, someone was singing. Catherine closed her eyes and let the song fill her, let it become part of her story, the story she was finally writing for herself. A story that began in darkness but had found its way to light. A story of survival, of strength, of a soul that refused to break. Her story. Hers alone. And it was only just beginning.